The doctor looked at the name on the admission form and felt as if someone had ripped the ground out from under her feet. Maria Santoro. The surname she had scribbled 1,000 times in school notebooks. The one she had dreamed of carrying one day. The one that represented the only man she had ever truly loved. And now his mother was in her emergency room with acute heart failure. And somewhere in this hospital, likely surrounded by armed men and palpable fear, was Marco Santoro, the sweet 15-year-old boy who had stolen her heart and become the most dangerous man in the city. What Clara didn't know, what she couldn't have guessed as she ran through the halls trying to save, the life of a woman who had once embraced her like a daughter, was that the coming days would test her in ways no medical school could prepare her for. That reuniting with her first love would be nothing like the romantic movies promised, and that sometimes saving a life means risking your own in ways you never imagined. But before I tell you how a dedicated doctor ended up at the center of a gang war, how she had to choose between her Hippocratic oath and her own survival, you need to understand who Clara Mendez was before that September night that changed everything. The smell of hospital disinfectant had become so familiar to Clara over the past 8 years that she barely noticed it anymore, like an invisible perfume that clung to every inch of her skin, every strand of her dark hair always. Pulled back in a practical bun she never had time to straighten properly. City General Hospital wasn't exactly where she dreamed of working when she entered medical school. It wasn't the cutting-edge place with the latest equipment and interesting cases that appeared in medical journals, but it was where real people came when they were truly desperate, when they had no health insurance or money or any other options, and Clara had learned long ago that real medicine didn't happen in shiny private clinics, but here, in the overcrowded corridors where every decision could mean the difference between life and death. 31 years old, and she looked 40 most days, with permanent dark circles under her brown eyes and the hunched posture of someone who spent 18 hours straight on her feet, rushing from patient to patient, making impossible decisions with incomplete information and limited resources. She had chosen emergency because she liked the intensity, liked not having time to overthink, liked how every minute mattered in a tangible, immediate way. But the truth she rarely admitted, even to herself, was that she had chosen emergency because it was the kind of job that left no room for personal life, for relationships, for the kind of vulnerability she had vowed never to allow again after her heart was broken at 16. Clara had grown up in the same neighborhood where she worked now. Streets she knew as well as the veins and arteries she memorized in medical school. Homes where families struggled to survive on minimum wages and dreams that always seemed just out of reach. Her mother was a cleaning lady, working in 3 different homes to keep Clara and her 2 younger brothers fed and clothed. Her father had disappeared when she was 7. Another statistic in a community where men often left and never returned, leaving women to hold it all together through sheer will and hard work. But Clara was smart, brilliant, in fact, the kind of student teachers noticed, who won scholarships and academic awards, who seemed destined for something greater than the circumstances of her birth. She had been accepted into the best private school in the city with a full scholarship at 14, a social and economic leap so great that she felt as if she had moved planets instead of just across town. And it was there, in that school full of children of doctors, lawyers, and businessmen, that she met Marco Santoro and discovered that love could hurt more than any physical wound. If you're wondering why I'm spending so much time telling you about Clara's past, why it matters that she grew up poor and worked hard and had her heart broken 15 years ago, it's because you need to understand exactly what she built on the ruins of that pain. How much she sacrificed to become the person she is now, to understand why meeting Marco again wouldn't be some romantic reunion, but a collision of worlds that should never have touched again. Leave a like now if you've ever had a first love you never quite forgot, if you've ever wondered what would have happened if things were different, because Clara is about to discover that some questions are better left unanswered. Clara was 15 when she met Marco, and he was unlike any boy she'd ever seen. Not because he was particularly handsome, though he was, with those intense dark eyes and black hair that fell over his forehead in a way that made girls sigh, but because he was kind in a way that seemed genuine rather than calculated, because he treated her like she mattered even when other students at the private school looked at her like she was an intruder in their privileged world. Marco was the son of Italian immigrants. His family ran a few restaurants in the city, and though he clearly had more money than Clara, he never made her feel less because of it. They became friends first, studying together in the library after class, sharing lunches in the courtyard, talking about everything. From music to philosophy to their dreams for the future, Marco wanted to be an architect, to build beautiful things that would last generations. And Clara wanted to be a doctor, to save lives and make a difference, and prove that poverty wasn't destiny. And somewhere between discussions of Shakespeare and math study sessions and long walks after school, friendship blossomed into something more, something intense and consuming in the way only first love can be. They were together for 8 months. 8 months of holding hands in the hallways and stolen kisses behind the bleachers and whispered promises about a future together that felt so right, so inevitable. Marco was the first boy to kiss Clara, the first to tell her he loved her, the first to make her believe she could have both professional success and personal happiness, that she didn't have to choose between her dreams and love. And then 2 weeks after Clara's 16th birthday, everything fell apart so suddenly and devastatingly that she still bears the scars. Marco's father was arrested, not for managing restaurants, but for running something much darker, an organized crime operation that had been hidden under the guise of legitimate businesses for years. News broke across the city, headlines about the Santoro family and their connections to the Italian mafia, about money laundering, protection rackets, and hired violence. And overnight, Marco went from popular kid to outcast, students avoiding him in the hallways, parents forbidding their children from associating with him, the school administration making it abundantly clear that he only remained enrolled because his money had already been paid. Clara tried to stay by his side, tried to be the support he so desperately needed as his world crumbled around him. But Clara's mother, who had worked so hard to give her daughter a better chance, who had sacrificed everything so Clara could attend this school and have opportunities she never had, made it very clear that staying with Marco would mean the end of any family support, the end of any hope of college, the end of all the sacrifices she had made. "You choose," her mother had said, tears streaming down her weary face. "You choose this boy and his life, or you choose your future, your education, your chance to be something more than just another statistic in this neighborhood." And Clara, at 16 and terrified of throwing away everything she had worked for, made the choice that would haunt her for the next 15 years. She chose her future. She broke up with Marco via cowardly text message because she couldn't face him in person, blocked his number when he repeatedly tried to call, avoided him in the school hallways, and eventually, when her mother insisted, transferred to another school across town to finish high school away from any memory of him. And for years, through all the years of college and medical school and brutal residency, Clara told herself she had made the right choice, the practical choice, the choice that allowed her to become a doctor and make a real difference in the world. But on silent nights, when sleep didn't come, Isali, when she was alone in her tiny apartment with only memories for company, Clara wondered about Marco, wondered what had happened to that kind boy with dreams of architecture, wondered if he hated her for what she'd done, wondered if he ever thought of her the way she, despite all her efforts, had never been able to completely stop thinking about him. And now, 15 years later, she was about to discover answers to all those questions, and they wouldn't be anything like she'd imagined. It was almost midnight on a Thursday when the ambulance arrived. Sirens wailing through the September night with that urgency that made Clara's stomach tighten because she knew, always knew before even seeing the patient, when things were truly bad. The nurse coordinator, a 50-year-old woman named Patricia who had seen it all in her 25 years in emergency medicine, appeared at Clara's side with that expression that spelled trouble. "We have a 56-year-old woman, acute heart failure, critical BP," she said quickly, but then hesitated in a way that was unlike her and Clara. "There's something you need to know about this case." Before Patricia could continue, the paramedics were rolling the gurney in, and Clara was shifting into doctor mode, that mental space where nothing mattered except saving. The life in front of her, where years of training took over, an emotion was locked away in a box she could open later, if she had the time, if she had the energy. The patient was a small woman, thin in a way that suggested chronic illness. Her skin gray with that pallor Clara had learned to recognize as a precursor to imminent cardiac arrest, but it was her face that made Clara freeze for a split second. A face she recognized immediately, despite 15 years, despite illness clearly having robbed her of much of her vitality. Maria Santoro, Marco's mother, was the woman who had embraced Clara as if she were her own daughter for those 8 months, who had insisted she stay for dinner every week, who had shared Italian recipes and stories about growing up in Naples and dreams of seeing her children thrive in her adopted country. And now she was dying on Clara's emergency gurney, her heart failing in ways the monitors were showing in frightening red lines, and Clara had perhaps minutes to stabilize her before it was too late. I need 4 access now, Clara heard her own voice, firm and professional even though her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Dobutamine and prep for intubation if necessary. Did someone call cardiology? The room exploded into choreographed movement, nurses and residents moving with practiced precision as Clara worked on the patient, her hands steady even though her mind was racing. Maria was conscious but barely, her eyes open but glassy, her breathing shallow and labored. And then, so faintly that Clara almost didn't hear her, Maria whispered, "Clara? Is that you, dear? After all these years?" "Yes, Mrs. Santoro," Clara said gently, placing one hand on hers while the other continued working. "It's me, and I'll take care of you, okay? You just need to stay with me." "Marco," Maria whispered, and there was urgency in her weak voice. "Someone needs to call Marco. He needs to know." Before Clara could respond, before she could process the implication that she was about to reunite with the person she had spent 15 years trying to forget, the emergency room doors burst open with such force they slammed into the walls, and the entire world seemed to stop. 6 men entered, all wearing expensive dark suits, all with posture and eyes that screamed danger, all with hands positioned near jackets that were too bulky to be just jackets. And in their midst, tall and broad-shouldered and emanating a kind of power that made people instinctively recoil, was Marco Santoro. But not the Marco Clara remembered. Not the gentle 15-year-old with dreams of architecture and an easy smile. This Marco was a grown man, probably 6 feet tall, solidly muscled, with hair still black but now cut short in a style that was pure efficiency, no frills. His face retained the bone structure she remembered, but now there were hard lines around his mouth, a small scar across his left eyebrow, and his eyes, God, his eyes were the scariest thing. Still dark as she remembered, but now cold, calculating, the kind of eyes that had seen violence and not blinked, that could order death without hesitation. He wore a dark gray suit that probably cost more than 3 months of Clara's salary, a black tie, and Italian shoes shiny enough to reflect the emergency room's hideous fluorescent lights. And when he walked in, absolutely everyone in the room stopped, nurses freezing mid-movement, residents flinching instinctively, even the monitors seeming to make more noise in response to his presence. "Where's my mother?" he said, and it wasn't a question, it was an order. His voice deep and carrying an Italian accent that was much more pronounced than Clara remembered, as if he'd spent time in Italy since she'd last seen him. Security was arriving. Clara could hear them in the hallway, but she knew instinctively it would be a mistake. That armed men from the hospital confronting clearly armed men from Marco would end in violence no one wanted. "Sir," she said, forcing her voice to remain calm, professional, as if she were speaking to any concerned relative rather than the most dangerous man in town. "I'm Dr. Mendez, and I'm taking care of your mother. She's seriously ill, and I need you and your men to wait outside while I stabilize her. After that, we can discuss her case." Marco finally looked at her, really looked, and Clara saw the exact moment recognition flickered in his eyes as he connected the doctor. In front of him with the girl he had loved 15 years ago. His expression changed only a fraction, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of his jaw, but it was enough for Clara to know he remembered, that he hadn't forgotten how she had abandoned him when he needed her most, how she had chosen her own ambition over him. "Clara," he said, and her name on his lips after so long made something strange happen in her chest, something she refused to examine. What a small world. Before she could respond, before she could process the sheer insanity of treating the mother of the man she had loved and abandoned, who is now clearly a criminal boss surrounded by armed bodyguards, the monitors began to blare louder. And Clara saw with growing horror that Maria was going into cardiac arrhythmia, her heart beating irregularly and inefficiently, seconds away from complete arrest. "Everyone out now," Clara shouted. There was no more time for subtlety or politics. "I need space to work or she'll die. Marco, your mother is going into cardiac arrest, and I need you to leave this room immediately." Marco didn't move, his eyes fixed on the monitors, on his mother convulsing on the gurney, and Clara saw something snap behind that cold mask, saw the 15-year-old appear for just a second before being pushed back down. "Save her," he said, his voice hoarse with an emotion he was clearly struggling to control. "I don't care what it costs, what resources you need, what it has to be done." You save my mother, Clara. Save her, or he paused, and the implicit threat hung in the air between them. Please. And then he was gone. His men following, leaving Clara alone with a dying patient, and the weight of knowing that failing here would not only mean losing a patient, but possibly starting something far more dangerous. Comment now, and tell me if you would have been able to focus on work with your first love watching, if you would have been able to be professional with so many emotions involved. Because Clara is about to have the most difficult night of her medical career, and meeting Marco again is just the beginning of her problems. And if you haven't subscribed to Karma Stories yet, hit that button now, because this story is just beginning. And you won't want to miss what happens next. The next 2 hours were the most intense of Clara's career. Maria went into full cardiac arrest 3 times, and 3 times Clara and her team managed to revive her, pumping her chest, shocking her heart back into rhythm, forcing air into her lungs when they refused to work on their own. It was brutal, it was exhausting, and each time the monitors showed that terrifying flatline, Clara had to fight the panic that threatened to consume her, had to remind herself that this was just another patient, that she had done this hundreds of times before, that she couldn't let personal history interfere with medical judgment. But how could she not? How could she look at Maria's face, a woman who had been kind to her when others judged her for her poverty, and not remember Sunday dinners filled with laughter and incredible food and a sense of belonging in a way she never felt in her own chaotic home? How could she forget that saving or failing to save this woman would affect Marco, the first and only man she had ever truly loved? A man who clearly still had the power to make her heart race, even after 15 years, and his transformation into something dangerous and possibly monstrous? Finally, Maria's heart rate stabilized enough for Clara to breathe, enough for her to be transferred to the intensive care unit under the care of the on-call cardiologist. Maria was in a medically induced coma, her body too weak to bear being awake, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that were essentially keeping her alive while her damaged heart tried to heal. And as Clara stood at the ICU door, checking the charts one last time before finally allowing herself a moment to process everything that had happened, a voice behind her made her whole body tense. "Is she going to be okay?" Marco asked, and Clara turned to find him standing in the shadowy hallway, alone now without his bodyguards, looking somehow more human and more vulnerable without all the power play around him. Clara took a deep breath, forcing herself into professional medical mode. "She's stable for now, but this is serious, Marco. Her heart is severely damaged, and the next 72 hours will be critical. She'll need surgery, probably a transplant eventually, but first we need to figure out why her heart failed so catastrophically. Officially." When was the last time she saw a cardiologist? Marco ran a hand through his hair, the gesture so familiar, so exactly like he used to do when frustrated or worried, that Clara felt inexplicable tears burn her eyes. "She doesn't go to doctors," he said, his voice weary. "She's stubborn. She thinks it's weak to admit to illness. I've been trying to get her to go for checkups for years, but she always refuses, says she's fine, that she'll live forever through sheer Italian determination. And me," he paused, his voice breaking slightly. "I was so busy with business, keeping my father's empire running, that I didn't push as hard as I should have. So this is my fault." "It's not your fault," Clara said automatically, falling into her role as a doctor, comforting a worried relative. Many people avoid doctors, especially this generation that grew up without good access to healthcare. "The important thing now is that she's here, that we're doing everything we can, that she has a chance." Silence fell between them, heavy with 15 years of unresolved history, with unasked questions and unanswered answers. Finally, Marco spoke again, his voice low. "Thank you," he said, "for saving her. I know I have no right to ask anything of you after everything, but thank you." Clara didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to navigate this impossible conversation with the boy who became a man who became a criminal, boss, but who was still, beneath it all, the first person she had ever loved. "I'm just doing my job," she finally said, and it sounded cold even to her own ears. Any doctor would have done the same. "No," Marco said, taking a step closer, and Clara had to fight the urge to back away, to keep a safe distance between them. "Any doctor would have treated her, maybe, but you fought for her as if she were your own mother. I saw it, Clara. I saw through the glass how you refused to give up, even when others were telling you it was useless. I saw how you treated her with kindness instead of just clinical professionalism. This wasn't just work. He was right. Clara knew he was right. And she hated that he could still read her so easily after all these years. Your mother was always kind to me, she finally admitted. When others judged me for being the poor girl with the scholarship, she treated me like I mattered. I never forgot that. I never forgot much about that time, Marco said, and there was something in his tone that made Clara's heart race. Clara, we need to talk. About what happened. About why you… No, Clara interrupted him, stepping back now, putting physical distance between them, because she needed it. Needed space to breathe, to think, to not drown in memories and regrets. There's nothing to talk about, Marco. That was 15 years ago. We're different people now, are we? Marco asked, and there was defiance in his voice now. Because I look at you, and I see the same girl who used to stay up late with me discussing philosophy, who laughed at the way I mispronounced English, who made me believe I could be more than just my father's son. Only now you're a doctor like you always dreamed of, and I am, he smiled, and it was bitter and weary. I'm exactly what my father was. Funny how things work. You're not your father, Clara said, before she could stop herself. Your father was… She searched for careful words. Your father made choices. You could have made different choices? Could I? Marco asked, and there was real anger in his voice now. Do you think I had a choice, Clara? When my father was arrested? When our family was destroyed overnight? When everyone we knew abandoned us, including you? He thrust that last part like a knife. Do you think I had the luxury of choice? I was 16 and suddenly responsible for my mother, my younger brother, a business that was crumbling. My father's men came to me saying someone needed to take control or everything would be taken over by rivals. So I did what I had to do. I became what I needed to be to keep my family safe and alive. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. Tears for that boy who had been forced to grow up too fast. Tears for impossible choices and paths not taken, and the knowledge that she had abandoned him just when he needed her most. I'm sorry, she whispered. Marco, I'm so sorry. I was young and scared, and you chose your future, Marco said, his voice softer now, the anger draining away to leave only weariness. I don't blame you for this, Clara. You made the right choice. You became a doctor, you save lives, you make a real difference in the world. If you had stayed with me, you would be trapped in my world, and that's not life. That's survival. Clara wiped away her tears, forcing herself back into professional composure because it was safer, easier than this raw vulnerability. I need to go, she said. My shift ended an hour ago, and I need to process all of this. I'll check on your mother in the morning, and Dr. Rahman, the cardiologist, will… Clara, Marco interrupted her, reaching out as if to touch her arm but stopping before making contact. Please, just promise me you'll take care of her. That you'll do everything you can. I promise, Clara said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. And then she was walking away from him, away from memories and regrets and the undeniable attraction she still felt despite everything, desperately needing fresh air and space to think. Share this video if you're seeing how past and present are colliding in impossible ways, because what comes next will complicate everything even further. Clara returned home to her tiny apartment, took the longest shower of her life, trying to wash the hospital smell and memories from her skin, and fell into bed, exhausted. But sleep wouldn't come no matter how tired she was. Her mind kept replaying that moment she saw Marco after all these years, the way her heart had skipped a betrayed beat, the way her body had recognized him even before her mind had fully processed it. She had spent 15 years convincing herself that she was over him, that he was just a memory of youth, a first love that everyone has and eventually forgets. But one look at him, and all the lies she'd told herself crumbled. She still felt something for Marco Santoro, something deep and frightening and completely impossible given who he'd become, given the world he lived in, given that she'd sworn to herself that she would never, ever again allow herself to be as vulnerable as she'd been at 16 when he'd left her devastated. And now she was trapped caring for her mother, trapped watching him over and over as Maria recovered or failed to recover, trapped in a situation that would test every professional boundary she'd established and every emotional defense she'd built. Clara's phone rang at 6 in the morning, jolting her from the sleep she'd finally achieved just 2 hours earlier. It was the hospital, Dr. Roman saying Maria had taken a turn for the worse overnight, that he needed Clara to come immediately because there were complications they hadn't anticipated, that the next few hours would be critical. Clara was dressed and out the door within 5 minutes, driving through empty streets. As the sun was just beginning to rise, her heart pounding with a mix of professional fear and something more personal she didn't want to examine too closely. And when she arrived at the ICU, when she saw Marco already there, standing outside his mother's glass room, looking as if he hadn't slept at all, as if he'd been keeping watch all night, Clara knew the next few weeks would test her in ways she wasn't prepared for. Maria's condition worsened over the next 3 days. Her heart failure was caused by severe dilated cardiomyopathy. Her heart muscles stretched and weakened to the point where it could no longer pump blood effectively. She needed a heart transplant, but her other health conditions, years of medical neglect, and chronic stress meant she likely wouldn't survive such an invasive surgery. Dr. Rahman was honest with Marco, explaining that Maria's chances weren't good, that they could try to keep her comfortable, but that a true cure was beyond their current medical reach. Marco received the news in silence, his face a mask of careful control that Clara recognized as his way of showing no emotion, a defense mechanism he had clearly honed over the years. But she saw his fists clench, a vein throb in his temple, his eyes grow just a shade darker, and she knew he was falling apart inside even as he kept everything bottled up on the outside. And then, he did something that surprised absolutely everyone. He asked to speak with Clara alone, saying he had medical issues he wanted to discuss with her specifically, and against her better judgment, Clara agreed. They went into a small, windowless, empty consulting room with only a table and 2 chairs and that distinctive smell of disinfectant that permeated every inch of the hospital. Marco closed the door behind them, and suddenly the space felt even smaller, the air between them thick with unresolved tension. "I need you to tell me the truth," Marco began without preamble. Not the medical version full of jargon and caution. "The real truth. Is my mother going to die?" Clara forced herself to meet his eyes, forced herself to give him the honesty he was asking for, even though it hurt. "Without a transplant, yes. Probably within weeks, maybe months if we're lucky. But Marco, she's on the transplant list. There's a chance. She's number 123 on the list," Marco interrupted her. "Dr. Roman told me. Do you know how many people ahead of her will die before a heart becomes available for her? How many are already sicker, younger, higher priority?" It was true. Everything he was saying was true, and Clara hated that she had no comforting response to offer. "I'm sorry," she said, and it sounded inadequate even to her own ears. "I wish I could do more, but the transplant system it can be circumvented," Marco said softly, and there was something in his tone that made Clara's stomach drop. "With enough money, with the right connections, hearts can be found. Not through legal channels, but there are markets, Clara. There are always markets for people with sufficient resources and fewer scruples." "No," Clara said immediately, understanding where he was going and refusing absolutely. "Marco, no. You can't buy a heart on the black market. That's it. It's unethical. It's illegal." "Yeah. My mother is dying," Marco cut her open, and there was desperation in his voice now, that mask of control finally slipping. "And I have enough power and money and connections to save her, but I need a doctor willing to perform surgery. Someone qualified I can trust. Someone who—" He paused, his eyes boring into hers. "Someone who owes me." The room grew so silent that Clara could hear her own heartbeat, could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above, could feel the weight of what he was asking, settling over her like increased gravity. "I owe you nothing," she finally said, but her voice trembled because it wasn't true. Not completely. She owed him an apology she'd never properly given. She owed him honesty about why she'd left him so brutally. She owed him something. But not that. Never that. "Marco, I'm a doctor. I swore an oath to do no harm, to follow ethical principles, to not participate in anything illegal or immoral. You're asking me to throw away everything I've worked for, to risk my medical license, my freedom, my entire integrity." "I know what I'm asking," Marco said, and he sounded tired now, so incredibly tired. "I know it's not fair, but Clara, she's my mother, the only person who stood by me when everyone else abandoned me, the only person who loved me unconditionally even when I became something she never wanted me to become. I would do anything, pay any price, commit any crime to save her. And I'm asking, not ordering, I'm asking as someone who once meant something to you. Please help me save the only family I have left." Clara felt tears burn her eyes again, tears at the impossibility of this situation, at how love, both her love for Maria and Marco's obvious love for his mother, was asking her to cross lines she had sworn never to cross. "I can't," she whispered. "Marco, I can't do what you're asking. Not because I don't want to help, but because it's wrong. Fundamentally wrong. And if I did this, no matter the reason, I would no longer be the person I've become. I would be, she searched for words. I would have sold my soul, and what would be left of me after that? Marco studied her for a long moment, and then slowly nodded. I understand, he said. And it seemed like he truly understood, that he had expected this answer, but had to try anyway. And I respect that. I respect that you have principles you won't compromise. It's part of what he paused. Part of what I've always admired about you. But Clara, he stood, moving toward the door. If you change your mind, if you find a way to help me that doesn't violate who you are, I'm here. I'm always here. And then he left, leaving. Clara alone with her relief at having made the right choice, and a growing nausea about whether she could really watch Maria die when there was a way, wrong but possible, to save her. Leave a like if you understand Clara's impossible dilemma. If you've ever had to choose between doing the right thing and helping someone you love, because this situation is about to get much more complicated. The next few days were torture. Clara checked on Maria multiple times per shift, monitoring her condition, which continued to deteriorate despite the best care modern medicine could offer without a transplant. And every time she entered that ICU room, Marco was there, sitting beside his mother's bed, holding her hand, speaking to her in Italian, even though she couldn't hear him, never leaving her alone except when nurses forced him out during procedures. Clara watched as this dangerous man, this criminal boss who likely ordered death without hesitation in the outside world, transformed into a devoted son who read to his mother from old Italian books, who adjusted her pillows with infinite kindness, who wept silently when he thought no one was looking. And each time she saw him like this, vulnerable and broken in ways he never allowed others to see, Clara felt her resolve weaken, felt those careful lines she had drawn blurring. On the 5th day, something changed. Clara was finishing her shift when Patricia, the nurse coordinator, pulled her aside with a worried expression. "We need to talk," she said quietly, "about Mr. Santoro and the developing situation that you need to know about." They went to the nurse's locker room, a small space that smelled of stale coffee and exhaust, and Patricia closed the door behind them. "There was an incident earlier today," she began. "One of our residents, Dr. Park, was checking on Mrs. Santoro when one of Mr. Santoro's men, not Marco, but one of the guards inquired about her condition. Dr. Park was honest, saying the outlook wasn't good, that, without a transplant, she probably had weeks. And then this guard, Clara, offered money. Lots of money. He said the Santoro organization could facilitate a faster transplant if we had a doctor willing to perform surgery without asking too many questions about the organ's origin." Clara's stomach turned. "They're going after other doctors," she said. "It wasn't a question. Trying to find someone who will do what I refused." Patricia nodded. "Dr. Park refused, obviously. He reported it immediately to administration. Now, there's a question about whether we should involve the police, whether we need to have the Santoro family removed from the entire hospital, whether we're in a situation where we're facilitating organized crime just by allowing them access to medical facilities." And Clara, she hesitated. "Your name has come up. People know you and Marco have a history, that you were close to the family years ago. There are questions about whether you can be objective here, whether you should continue to be a treating doctor." Clara felt panic rise in her chest. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, hearing desperation in her own voice. "I refused when Marco asked. I made it very clear that I wouldn't participate in anything illegal or unethical." "I know you did," Patricia said gently. "But perception matters, Clara. And perception is that you have a conflict of interest here that could compromise your judgment. Administration wants you off this case. They're assigning Miss Santoro to another team starting tomorrow." "No," Clara said immediately. "No, she needs me. I know your case better than anyone. I know your history. You're too close," Patricia interrupted her. "And that's the problem. Good medicine requires objectivity. It requires the ability to make difficult decisions without letting emotion cloud judgment. Clara, as your friend, I'm telling you that you need to step aside. For your own good and the patient's good." But Clara didn't walk away. She couldn't. Instead, she went directly to administration, argued her case, insisted that she was perfectly capable of maintaining professional boundaries, that removing her from the case would be worse for Maria, who needed continuity of care. And eventually, reluctantly, they agreed that she could remain as a treating physician, but under increased observation, with supervision from senior physicians and careful documentation of every decision. It was humiliating but necessary, and Clara accepted the terms because the alternative was abandoning Maria, and she had spent 15 years living with the guilt of abandoning Marco. She couldn't add abandoning her dying mother to that burden. That night, as Clara was checking Maria's monitors for the last time before going home, Marco appeared silently beside her, making her jump. "Sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to scare you." Clara turned to face him, and all the frustrations and fears and anger of the past few days finally boiled over. "Your men are trying to bribe other doctors," she hissed, keeping her voice low but letting him hear the fury in it. "You told me you were asking, not ordering, that you respected my principles. But then your men go after other people, trying to find someone less ethical, less concerned with consequences? This is unacceptable, Marco." "You're right," Marco said, and he sounded genuinely remorseful. "That was a mistake, my fault for not being clearer with my organization. About boundaries, I've dealt with that. There will be no more approaches from other doctors, no more offers of money or facilitation of illegal transplants. I promise. But Clara," he stepped closer, his presence filling the small space around her, "you have to understand my desperation here. I'm watching my mother slowly die, and there are things I could do, ways I could save her. But they all involve crossing lines you rightly won't cross. So I'm caught between the ethical code your profession demands and the love for my family my world demands, and I don't know how to reconcile that." Clara felt her anger subside, replaced by something softer, more complicated. "I know," she said softly, "and I'm sorry you're in this position, that your mother is in this position. But Marco, medicine doesn't work through shortcuts. The transplant system exists for a reason. It exists to ensure justice, to ensure that organs go to those who need them most based on medical necessity rather than money or power. If we start making exceptions, if we start allowing the rich to jump the queue through black markets, the whole system will crumble. And then people like your mother, people without your resources, would have no chance at all." "It's easy to be ethical when it's not your mother dying," Marco retorted, and there was raw pain in his voice now. "It's easy to talk about justice and systems when it's not your heart being torn apart, watching the only person who ever truly loved. You wither away, Clara. I would kill for her. I killed for her, for my family. I'm the head of a criminal organization. I have no illusions about who I am or what I've done. But this one thing, this one chance to save her, requires someone with your skills, someone I can trust. And you're saying no to me for reasons I understand but can't accept. So where does that leave us?" Claire had no answer to that. They were silent for a long moment, the weight of the history between them and the impossibility of the present situation making it hard to breathe. Finally, Marco spoke again. "Did you hate me?" he asked, and the question was so unexpected, so unrelated to what they were discussing, that Clara blinked in confusion. "What?" "After you left me," Marco clarified, his eyes fixed on her face. "After you broke up with me via 2-line text and blocked my number and transferred schools so you'd never have to see me again. Did you hate me?" "Because I spent years trying to understand, trying to figure out what I did wrong. Why you would be so brutal after everything we shared." "No," Clara whispered, tears burning her eyes. "I never hated you, Marco. I hated myself for having to make this choice. I hated my mother for forcing me to do it. I hated the world that made it impossible for us both to have what we wanted. But never you. You were," she paused, searching for words, "you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and probably ever since. And when I left you, I broke my own heart as much as I broke yours. But I didn't have the luxury of showing it because I had to move on. I had to focus on my future. I had to prove that sacrifice was worth something. So it kept you up at night too," Marco said softly. "Memory of us, wondering what could have been." "Every night for the first year," Clara admitted. "After that, only every week. After that, only occasionally when something reminded me of you. But it was always there, Marco. That regret, that question of whether I made the right choice. Whether there could have been a third path that I didn't see because I was too scared and young and under too much pressure." She wiped away her tears fiercely. "But it doesn't matter now. We're different people. We live in different worlds. And there's no way back to those teenagers we used to be." Marco reached out and gently took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers in a way that made her heart skip a beat. "Maybe not," he said. "But maybe there can be a way forward. Something new built on old foundations." "Clara, I never stopped." He paused, reeling back whatever he was about to say. "I never forgot you. And seeing you again, even in these terrible circumstances, is both a gift and a curse. Because it reminds me of what I lost, But it also makes me hopeful for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, all is not lost. Before Clara could respond, before she could process the burst of hope and fear her words had triggered, alarm bells began blaring. Maria's monitor was showing a dangerous cardiac arrhythmia, her heart entering another episode of atrial fibrillation that, if not treated immediately, would result in cardiac arrest. Clara was instantly on the move, shouting orders to nurses, preparing the defibrillator, doing everything in her power to stabilize Maria again. Marco was pushed out of the room, forced to watch through glass as his mother fought for every breath, as the medical team fought to save her once again. This time, it was closer, much closer. Maria stopped twice, and twice Clara managed to bring her back. But it was clear to everyone that time was running out, that the next episode might be the one where they couldn't resuscitate her, where they would have to call him and let her go. And when they finally finished, when Maria was stabilized but barely alive, Clara left that room and found Marco leaning against the hallway wall, his face as pale as she'd ever seen it, his hands shaking. "How long?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Days," Clara said honestly. "Maybe weeks if we're lucky." "Marco, I'm so sorry." He nodded slowly, then slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. And Clara, against all better judgment, against all professional boundaries, sat beside him and pulled him into her arms, holding him as he finally allowed himself to break, as he cried for the mother he was losing, and the boy he used to be, and the life he could have had if circumstances had been different. And in that silent hospital corridor at 3 a.m, with only machines humming and fluorescent lights flickering, something shifted between them. Something healed, or maybe just shifted into something new, something neither of them had a name for yet, but which they could both feel. Subscribe to Karma Stories now if you want to see where this impossible story goes, because what comes next will force Clara to make a choice that will change everything. 2 days later, Dr. Rahman called Clara into his office with a somber expression. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "Maria has developed complications, blood clots forming in the weakened chambers of her heart. If we don't perform surgery to remove them within 24 hours, they will travel to her brain or lungs, and she will die." "But she's too weak for surgery," Clara said, confusion clear in her voice. "You yourself said that her chances of surviving any invasive procedure are almost zero." "Exactly," Dr. Rahman agreed. "We're in an impossible situation. If we operate, she'll probably die on the table. If we don't operate, she'll definitely die within days. There are no good options here, Clara. And the family," he hesitated. "Mr. Santoro specifically is demanding we do something, anything, to save her. He won't accept that there's nothing more we can do." "I'll talk to him," Clara said, though her stomach churned thinking about that. Conversation. "I'll make him understand the medical reality here." But when she met Marco that afternoon, when she tried to explain the impossible medical situation they faced, he interrupted her with a proposal that turned her world upside down. "I found a heart," he said quietly. "On the black market, through my contacts. The match isn't perfect, but it's close enough. It could be here in 12 hours. All I need is a surgeon willing to perform the transplant." "No," Clara said immediately. Even though part of her, the part that remembered Maria's kindness and looked at Marco's desperation and wanted to help at any cost, hesitated. "Marco, we've already discussed this. I won't participate in the organ black market. It's illegal, unethical, and on top of all that, we don't know the origin of this heart, whether it was obtained through proper consent or whether it's even safe." Marco's response was to stare at her. "It's from a healthy young man who died in a motorcycle accident in a country where the transplant system isn't as organized as it is here," he said. "The family was willing to sell because they need money, and I'm willing to pay because I need the heart. No one is being forced, no one is being hurt. It's a transaction between willing parties that happens to circumvent bureaucratic regulations." "Bureaucratic regulations exist for a reason," Clara argued, but her conviction was wavering, and she hated it. Hated that she was even considering it. Hated that love and desperation were making her question principles she had held so firmly. And Marco, playing all or nothing, said, "If you don't do this, if you let my mother die when there is a way to save her, I will live with it. But will you? Will you be able to look in the mirror 10 years from now and say you made the right choice? That your principles were worth the life of a woman who loved you as a daughter? That being ethical mattered more than being compassionate? Because I'm telling you, Clara, I'm begging you, please help me save her. And if it makes me a monster to ask for this, then I am a monster. But I'm a monster who is about to lose everything that matters." The words hit Clara like a physical blow. And in that moment, in that terrible moment of decision, she realized she had no good answer, no clear path forward, no way out of this situation with her principles and conscience intact. Because any choice she made would cost her something precious. Then she said words that would change everything, words she knew she couldn't take back. "Give me 24 hours. To think, to see if there's a legal option we haven't explored, to find out if I can live with myself, if I do what you're asking." Marco nodded slowly. 24 hours, he agreed. "But Clara, after that, if I still say no, I'll find another doctor. I'll find someone, anyone willing to do this, because I won't let her die when I have the power to save her, no matter the cost." Those next 24 hours were the longest of Clara's life. She researched every possible medical option, called specialists around the country, and searched for miracles in medical literature. But in the end, the science was clear. Maria Santoro was dying, and without a transplant in days, not weeks, she wouldn't have a chance. And Clara also knew that if she refused, Marco would find a less qualified, less caring doctor. Someone who would perform surgery for money without regard for patient safety or ethics. And then Maria could die not just from illness, but from medical incompetence. And that would be partly Clara's fault for refusing to help. It was twisted logic. Clara knew it. It was the kind of rationalization doctors use when crossing lines they swore never to cross. But at 3 a.m. of that 24th hour, Clara called Marco and said 5 words that would change both their lives forever. "I'm going to have the surgery." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Marco said, his voice thick with emotion, "Thank you. Clara, I know what you're risking. I know what this costs you. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you don't regret this, that this choice doesn't destroy you the way I fear it will." Clara didn't answer because she didn't trust her voice to stay afloat. Instead, she said, "Where and when?" Marco gave details. A private medical facility his family owned, state-of-the-art equipment, a small team of medical professionals who were loyal to Santoros and wouldn't ask questions. The heart would arrive in 8 hours. Surgery would take place 10 hours after that to give Clara time to prepare both the patient and herself. "I'll be there," Clara said, and hung up before she could change her mind. Before she could remember all the reasons why this was a terrible idea that could cost her career, her freedom, her entire identity as a doctor. Share this video if you understand that sometimes love forces us to make impossible choices. Choices that test everything we think we know about right and wrong. Because Clara is about to cross a line she never imagined crossing, and the consequences will change her forever. The medical facility was in an unincorporated part of the city. A building that from the outside looked like just another warehouse, but inside was equipped with cutting-edge medical technology that major hospitals only dreamed of. Clara arrived 2 hours before the scheduled surgery, needing time to inspect the equipment, meet the support staff, and convince herself once again that she was doing the right thing, even though every trained instinct screamed that she was making a terrible mistake. Marco met her at the door, and for the first time since she'd seen him again, he wasn't surrounded by bodyguards, wasn't wearing a cold boss mask. It was just him, in jeans and a simple sweater, looking young and scared and so grateful it made Clara's heart ache. "Thank you for coming," he said softly. "I know it wasn't easy. I know you can still change your mind." "But I won't change my mind," Clara interrupted, because if she thought about it too much more, maybe she would, and then Maria would die and that would be on her conscience too. "Let's just do this. Let's save your mother, and then we can deal with the consequences." The medical team consisted of an anesthesiologist who had been exiled from practice in the United States, but was brilliant, 2 surgical nurses who had worked in top-tier hospitals before being recruited by Santoros, and a perfusion technician who would keep Maria alive during surgery while her heart stopped. They were professional, experienced, and treated Clara with the respect of colleagues rather than the judgment of criminal accomplices. And when the heart arrived, preserved in a state-of-the-art organ transporter, Clara carefully inspected it, checked for compatibility, and concluded with relief mixed with nausea that it was suitable, that this could actually work. The heart transplant surgery lasted 9 hours. 9 hours of intense concentration where nothing existed except the patient on the table, the heart in her hands, the precision of every cut and stitch. Clara had assisted with transplants during training, even assisted on some, but never as the lead surgeon. But training took over, years of education and practice guiding her hands as she connected arteries and veins, ensuring each connection was perfect, and finally allowing the new heart to take over, shocking it back to life and watching with awe that never aged as it began to beat strong and steady in Maria's chest. And then it was done. Maria was stable, her new heart pumping blood through her body for the first time, all her vital signs better than they had been in weeks. Clara emerged from the operating room shaking with exhaustion and adrenaline and found Marco waiting, his face pale and tense. "She's fine," Clara said immediately, seeing the desperation in his eyes. "The surgery was a success. The heart is functioning perfectly, and if there are no complications, she will recover completely." Marco closed his eyes briefly, relief so obvious it was almost palpable. Then he was pulling Clara into his arms, hugging her tightly as he murmured thanks in Italian and English, his voice cracking with emotion. And Clara, so tired she could barely stand, so emotionally drained she had no defenses left, allowed herself to melt into that embrace, allowed herself, for just a moment, to forget that she had just committed a grave crime, that she had crossed a line of no return, that she had become someone she never thought she would become. For just this moment, she allowed herself to feel the triumph of having saved a life, of having given Marco back his mother, of having made a difference even if her methods were questionable. The next few days were a whirlwind. Maria recovered remarkably well, her new heart strong and reliable in ways her old one never was. She woke from the induced coma 3 days after surgery, confused but alive, and when she saw Clara at her bedside, her first words were, "You saved my life, darling. My Mark told me everything. Thank you for not giving up on me." Clara fought back tears as she held Maria's hand, checked her vital signs, adjusted her medications, and pretended this was normal medical procedure rather than the result of decisions that could send her to prison for decades. And then, a week after surgery, when Maria was strong enough to be transferred to a rehabilitation facility, Clara returned to her normal life, or tried to. But nothing was normal anymore. She felt like an imposter in the hospital, as if everyone could see her guilt written all over her face. She looked at her colleagues talking about medical ethics and wanted to scream that she had violated every principle, that she was exactly the kind of doctor the profession should be removing. But worse than guilt was confusion about what she felt for Marco, because spending time with him during Maria's recovery, seeing him gentle and vulnerable and so obviously relieved to have her mother back, had awakened feelings Clara had buried for 15 years. She was falling in love with him again, or maybe she had never stopped. And that was possibly worse than the crime she had committed, because at least crime had a clear line. There were laws that said it was wrong. But love for a man who was a criminal, but who was also her first love, and the only person who made her feel seen and valued in ways no one else could, that had no clear lines, no rules to follow. It was 3 weeks after surgery that everything fell apart. Clara was at the hospital when 2 detectives appeared, badges flashing and expressions serious, asking if she had time to answer a few questions about the medical case. Her heart sank, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Of course," she said. "About which patient?" "Maria Santoro," the older detective said, watching her face carefully. "We understand you were her treating doctor, that she was critically ill, and that she's now made a remarkable recovery. We're just following up on some loose ends, you see." A routine question about how a critically ill patient suddenly got so much better. Clara felt panic rise, but forced it down. "Mrs. Santoro responded well to treatment," she said, choosing her words carefully. "Sometimes patients recover in ways doctors don't anticipate. It's rare, but it does happen." The younger detective pulled out a notebook. "Hospital records show she was discharged 3 weeks ago," she said. "And there's no mention of any surgical procedure, any transplant, anything that would explain such a dramatic recovery. But we have an informant who suggests the surgery may have occurred outside the hospital, in an unregistered facility, using an organ obtained through illegal means. Do you know anything about this, Dr. Mendez?" "I can't discuss the details of a patient's case without proper authorization," Clara said, hating how her voice shook slightly. "But I can say that I treated Ms. Santoro within the ethical guidelines of my profession at all times. If there are questions about her care, they should be directed through the appropriate channels." The detectives exchanged glances. "Let's do that then," the older detective said. "We'll be in touch, Dr. Mendez. And understand, organ trafficking is a federal crime, if you're involved. Intentionally or not, the consequences are severe. For your career, your freedom, everything." We hope you understand the seriousness of the situation." They left, and Clara barely managed to finish her shift before running to the bathroom and vomiting from sheer fear. She called Marco from the hospital phone, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to dial. "The police know," she whispered when he answered. "They're investigating. They know about the surgery, Marco. What did I do?" "What did we do?" "Breathe," Marco said, and he sounded too calm, too controlled. "Where are you?" "At the hospital. Stay there. I'll pick you up in 20 minutes. And Clara," he hesitated, "don't talk to anyone else about this, not without a lawyer present. Understand?" 20 minutes later, Clara was in the back seat of a tinted SUV driving across town to Marco's house, a sprawling mansion in a wealthy area where neighbors were far enough away not to notice or care about each other's business. Inside, surrounded by luxury that made her modest reality seem even more distant, Marco sat with her and explained the situation. "An informant in my organization," he said, cold fury in his eyes. "Someone close enough to know about the surgery, about your involvement. I'm dealing with it, finding the source of the leak. But in the meantime, you need legal and physical protection. The police can't prove anything without solid evidence, and I'll make sure they don't. But I committed a crime," Clara said. And it was strange to say it out loud, to make it real in ways it hadn't been when it was still just a shared secret between them. "I performed an illegal transplant using an organ obtained through the black market. If they investigate deeply, if they talk to the right people, they'll find out. Marco, I could go to prison." "You won't," he said with absolute certainty that was comforting and terrifying in equal measure. "Because I will protect you the same way you saved my mother. With every resource I have, with every connection, with every bit of power I've built. You're mine now, Clara. And no one, not the police or anyone else, touches what's mine." The words should have frightened Clara. They should have made her recognize how much control she was giving up, how deeply she was becoming entangled in Marco's world. But instead, she felt strangely safe, protected in ways she had never allowed since leaving him 15 years ago. "Stay tonight," Marco said. "Not an order, but a gentle request. In the guest room only where I can know you're safe, where the police can't show up at your door in the middle of the night. Please, Clara. Only until we learn the full extent of the investigation." And Clara, too tired to argue, too scared to return to the empty apartment, agreed. Leave a like if you see how choices lead to consequences, how one decision can trigger an avalanche that changes your entire life, because Clara is about to discover that entering Marco's world isn't something you do temporarily. It's a total commitment that fundamentally changes who you are. That night at Marco's house turned into 2, then 3, then a week as the investigation continued. And during that time, something changed between them. They talked late each night, not just about the immediate situation, but about everything. About 15 lost years, about the choices they made, about who they became. Marco talked about building a criminal empire he didn't want to, but felt compelled to maintain to honor his father's legacy and protect his family. Clara talked about the loneliness of pursuing dreams at the cost of personal connections, of building a career but forgetting to build a life. And slowly, inevitably, they fell in love again. Or maybe they just stopped fighting the love that never truly died. It was Marco who made the first move, finding Clara in the garden one full moon night, saying, "I can't pretend anymore that you being here is just about protection. That I'm just being careful and keeping you safe. The truth is, these last few days with you have been the happiest I've been in 15 years. The thought of you leaving when the investigation is over kills me. Clara, I still love you. I always have. And I know it's complicated, I know our worlds are different, but I love you too." Clara interrupted him, tears streaming down her face. "God help me, but I love you too, Marco. And I don't know what to do with it, how to make it work when everything about the situation is impossible." Marco pulled her into his arms. And the kiss they shared was 15 years of longing and regret and unresolved love finally finding expression. And that night, there was no guest room, no careful boundaries. There was just them, rediscovering each other, proving that some loves don't die, no matter how much time passes or how different people become. But reality hit hard the next morning, when Marco's lawyer arrived with news. The investigation was intensifying, he explained. They had circumstantial evidence, testimonies suggesting an illegal transplant had occurred, and they were building a case. They didn't have definitive proof yet, but they were close. And if they could get a search warrant for the medical facility where the surgery took place, it would be game over. "Then I need to flee," Clara said, panic rising. "Leave the country before they arrest me." Marco shook his head. Running away admits guilt makes you a fugitive. Forever. Instead, he turned to the lawyer. What's the likelihood of getting the case dismissed through connections? The lawyer looked uncomfortable. Possible, but risky. The kind of interference you're talking about would attract attention, possibly federal attention. It could expose more of your operations, Marco. It could cost more than simply letting Dr. Mendez face consequences and deal with legal repercussions. So that's what you're suggesting? Marco asked, his voice growing. Dangerous. That I let the woman who saved my mother, the woman I love, go to prison to protect her business? I'm saying you need to weigh the costs, the lawyer said carefully, and consider other options. Clara could help the investigation. Perhaps offer testimony against her organization in exchange for an immunity agreement. It would be a way to protect her while... What? Marco exploded, standing up so abruptly that his chair fell over. Are you suggesting I ask her to betray me, too? Testify against me? Clara touched his arm, forcing him to look at her. Marco, she said gently, maybe he's right. Maybe that's a better way. I don't want to destroy you, but I also don't want to go to prison for decades for a crime I committed to help you. If there's a deal, if there's a way for me to pay for what I did without losing my entire life, no, Marco said firmly. You won't testify against me. You won't enter the protected witness program. You won't disappear from my life again. I'll find another way. And he found it, but it cost everything. Marco made a deal with federal prosecutors. Not immunity for Clara, but something different. He would take full responsibility for the illegal transplant, claiming he forced Clara to undergo the surgery under threat, that she was a coerced victim rather than a willing participant. He would go to prison, probably for 5 to 10 years, but Clara would go free, keep her medical license, keep the life she had built. No, Clara said. Immediately when she learned of the plan, Marco, no. You can't do this. I won't let you go to prison for a choice I made. It's not your choice, Marco said gently. It's already done. Papers are signed. Deal is done. Tomorrow I turn myself in, and you're free. Clara cried, screamed, begged him to reconsider, but Marco was unwavering. This is how I do right by you, he said. For leaving you 15 years ago when you had to make an impossible choice between me and the future. For putting you in a position where you had to choose between principles and helping my family. For loving you in ways that only brought complications and pain. Let me do this, Clara. Let me protect you the way I couldn't when we were children. It's love in its purest form, absolute sacrifice without expecting anything in return. But Clara, you have to promise something. When I leave, if you still want me, if there's still something between us, will you wait for me? Will you give me the chance to build the life together we should have had? I will wait, Clara promised through tears. I will wait as long as it takes. I love you, Marco Santoro. Always have, always will. They had one night to say everything they never said. To make promises about a future that was uncertain but possible. To hold each other as if they could stop time through sheer will. And then morning came, and Marco was putting on his suit, was kissing her for the last time, was walking out the door in the custody of federal officers as Clara watched through tear-stained windows. Maria, now fully recovered, hugged Clara tightly. He will come back, she whispered. My son is strong, and your love is stronger. You just have to believe, darling. You have to believe that the story isn't over, just paused. Subscribe to Karma Stories now because this story isn't over yet, because true love doesn't end with separation, and because Clara and Marco have final chapters to write. The next 5 years were the most difficult of Clara's life. She returned to work at the hospital, carrying guilt and gratitude in equal measure, struggling to make sense of Marco's sacrifice for her. She visited him in prison every week, without fail, talking through glass about nothing and everything, maintaining a strong connection even when separated by bars and regulations and the brutal reality of the prison system. And Clara cared for Maria, who became a second mother to her, who shared stories about Marco as a child, who kept hope alive when it seemed easier to give up. And then, after 5 years of good behavior and successful appeals that Marco paid expensive lawyers to pursue, he was released. Clara waited at the prison gates, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it, her hands shaking with anxiety and anticipation. And when Marco emerged, older but somehow lighter, as if years in prison had paradoxically freed him somehow, she ran into his arms and knew it had been worth the wait that their love had survived it all. They were married 3 months later, a small ceremony with only close family and a few friends, Maria crying with joy as she saw her son finally find the happiness he deserved. Marco had left the criminal world completely, using his time in prison to reflect and change, building legitimate businesses that employed people who needed second chances just as he had. And Clara remained a doctor, but now with a deeper understanding that medicine was not just a science, but the art of navigating moral impossibilities, of making imperfect choices in situations with no good answers. She had crossed a line, yes. She had violated principles, yes. But she had saved a life, and in the process, she had learned that ethics in the real world are more complicated than in textbooks. That sometimes doing the right thing means accepting that you will also do the wrong thing, that love and morality don't always align perfectly. And if there's a lesson in the story, it's that first love can last a lifetime if you're brave enough to fight for it. That second chances exist if you're willing to pay the price. That sometimes saving someone means accepting that you may also need to save yourself from the consequences. Clara had looked at Marco through pain and years and impossible choices, and she had seen a love that never died. And in the end, that love was worth every sacrifice, every tear, every moment of doubt. Because true love isn't about perfection, it's about choosing someone over and over again through imperfect circumstances. It's about building something beautiful from broken pieces. It's about proving that some bonds can't be severed no matter how much time passes or how impossible the situation seems. Share this video if you believe in a love that transcends time and circumstances. If you believe that some people are meant to be together, no matter how much the universe tries to tear them apart. If you believe that second chances are real, if you're brave enough to take them. Leave a comment telling me if you would have made the same choice as Clara, if you would have risked everything for love, if you would have crossed ethical lines to save someone you love. These are questions we all face in different ways. These are choices that define who we are when faced with moral impossibilities. This was the story of Clara Mendez and Marco Santoro, a doctor and a criminal boss who shouldn't have worked but who proved that true love finds a way, that sacrifice has meaning when made for the right reasons, that some first loves are destined to be last loves too. And they lived not in a fairy tale, because life is too complicated for perfect endings, but together, choosing each other every day, building a family and a life and a legacy that honors both the sacrifices they made and the love that survived it all. Until next time on Karma Stories, always remember, true love doesn't give up, no matter the obstacles. Second chances exist for those brave enough to take them. And sometimes the person who's best for you is the one you found when you were both too young to know how to keep it, but old enough to fight for it when fate gives you another chance. Choose love, choose courage, choose to believe that some stories are destined to have happy endings, no matter how many painful chapters come before. And never underestimate the power of first love, because sometimes, just sometimes, first love is also the last and greatest love of all.